Hello, lovely listeners. My name is Beanie.
Hi, I'm Laurel.
And welcome to the very first episode of The Weeb Years, a look back at the media and culture of the Western anime boom.
Yahoo!
Laurel.
Hi.
Can I, if you could, can I get a hell yeah?
Hell yeah!
Hell yeah. Now, you and I have both been anime fans for the majority of our lives, and we both had our formative years in the anime boom, the Western anime boom, that wonderful little period of like the 90s and 2000s when anime was really first starting to take root here in North America.
You know, that thing that kept Hot Topic in business for so many years.
That and Invader Zim.
Oh god, yeah.
Everything from VHS copies of Ninja Scroll at your local home video store to watching Naruto on Netflix.
I really don't remember a point in my life where I wasn't watching anime, though, because I think my earliest memories are from when I was like 3 or 4. And according to my family, the first anime I was really obsessed with was around when I was like 1.5. So I genuinely don't remember not watching anime. My first favorite anime was the Kuropi and Friends OVA series, the Sanrio ones.
Oh.
Because I believe they had a Canadian dub and they aired on Canadian networks here.
And, you know, that brings up a good point. You are Canadian.
I am Canadian.
I have lived in Missouri my entire life, and you, I believe, have lived in Canada your whole life.
Yes, I've lived in Ontario my whole life. I do have a bit of, I have a decent knowledge of American stuff because I had a lot of American friends growing up online. My wife is American originally. So I do have a lot of perspective into what things were like there.
And see, I'm a dumb little American where the only things I really know about Canada come from watching episodes of Letterkenny and Kim's Convenience. But no, this is actually something I'm very excited about doing the show with you in particular because, you know, you say Western anime boom, and that does include Canada.
We had anime.
And for the most part, your guys' experiences, I'm sure, were pretty similar to ours in terms of anime coming into your purview.
For sure. One thing to know about Canadian media is that a lot of networks have rules where 30% of what you broadcast has to be Canadian in origin. So anything where the dub was produced in Canada would have been way more likely to have actually been on the air than something that was dubbed elsewhere. But I know that a lot of the voice acting industry from that time was based in Vancouver.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
I believe in like the 90s and early 2000s, a lot of the voice acting industry was really based in like Vancouver because it was cheaper to get Canadian voice act. I might be talking out my ass, but I feel like this is a thing.
I did know that. I do know that in that time period, it was very popular to get to Canadian voice actors. There's the famous big green dub of the Dragon Ball Z movies that were done in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a very common question to ask another anime fan is like, oh, what was your first anime? You know? And a lot of people lie. Because
yes.
if a lot of us are being honest, the real answer is going to be like Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh! You know, something like that. But I feel like that doesn't really work because when I was watching Pokemon when I was 6 or whatever, I didn't realize that it was anime. To me, it was just another cartoon, you know?
Mm-hmm. That's very much the Western experience, I think, for a lot of kids. So for me, I would always say, like, the first anime I truly watched was the first one I went out of my way to watch with subtitles. Now, That's not to diminish dubs as a medium, but I think that's really, for me, the point where I recognized, oh, this is anime, this is from Japan, this is not a Western cartoon. And going into that process, I guess, for me, was really the point where I discovered anime, even though I kind of had a bit of a radar on it always.
See, that's the way I think of it too. When someone asks, what was your first anime? The question they're actually asking is, what was the first thing that you saw where as a child you could look at it and recognize, like, oh, this is something different, you know?
Yeah.
And for me, the answer to that question was Samurai Champloo.
Ah!
I have such a vivid memory of being like 10 years old. I'm visiting my dad and my step family in Oklahoma. I'm staying in my stepbrother's room. He's got a bunk bed. He's asleep on the top bunk.
Oh, fuck yes.
The lights are off, but he's let me turn on his little TV that he has in his bedroom, his little CRT. I've got the volume down really low. I'm sitting in front of it, and Adult Swim is on. Do you have Adult Swim in Canada?
We did at the time, I think. But I don't think that the channel that had Adult Swim was the channel that was broadcasting Samurai Champloo, which is really weird.
Oh, weird. But yeah, Adult Swim is on. And I discovered this show that it's unlike anything that little baby Beanie has ever really experienced before. And that was my first real introduction to the concept of anime, was getting to experience Samurai Champloo for the first time.
Yeah, I feel like here it was on YTV. But because I remember seeing, like, Coming Up Next, and then whatever, like, I remember seeing it like that, but it was always on way too late for me to watch it.
Oh yeah, here I think Samurai Champloo aired at like 1 a.m. or something.
Yeah, it was, like, pretty late, so I wouldn't have been able to watch it at the time.
So, Samurai Champloo, it was originally released in 2004 by Manglobe, and was directed by Shinichiro Watanabe, of Cowboy Bebop and Space Dandy fame.
I love Space Dandy. I haven't finished Cowboy Bebop, which is going to be sacrilege, but I'm gonna just put it out there now. Cope with it. Well, I'll have fresh eyes on it later.
Yeah, you'll have an excuse soon, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It features the compositions and musical talents of a bunch of different hip-hop artists of the time. Major ones are Suchie, Fat John, Force of Nature, and the one most people think of when they think of Samurai Champloo's music, Nujabes. I actually am realizing now I'm not sure how to pronounce it. R.I.P. also, apparently he died a few years ago.
Oh no!
Sad.
That's so sad.
The show was licensed in North America by Geneon, with a dub handled by Bang Zoom Entertainment. In May of 2005, it began broadcasting on Adult Swim, at least here in North America. Sorry, at least here in America, where it saw almost instant success. It was very popular. So
another thing to know about Canadian broadcasting is that typically we tend to get shows a year or two later due to licensing, because if it's produced in the US and it's not a Canadian dub, then the different networks will like bid for it in the same way that I guess nowadays Hulu and Netflix and whatever would be fighting over a property.
Okay.
So it would take like a year or two for things to hit here. I think in How I Met Your Mother, there's like a joke about that, and how everything in Canada was a few years behind the US. So if you grew up in like the late 90s in Canada, it was like the same as growing up in like the early to mid 90s in the States, because we got everything after. Everything went to the States first and then here later.
Okay, gotcha. Now, the license is currently being held by Crunchyroll after their merger with Funimation from a few years ago. You can watch the entire show on Crunchyroll, and you can also purchase the entire series on Blu-ray through their online store. Now, the title of the show, Samurai Champloo, do you know what that means?
I have no fucking clue. I thought it was just like a combination of words that people made up. Like, I know what samurai means. I think everyone knows what samurai means. I figured Champloo was just a made-up word.
Now, I did have to look this up, but Champloo apparently comes from the name of a stir-fry dish from Okinawa called Goya Chanpuru.
Oh.
Which Champloo means, like, mixed. So, Samurai Champloo could very roughly be translated to, like, Samurai Remix.
Oh, okay.
A little bit of backstory for the creation of the show. After Cowboy Bebop, Watanabe was apparently feeling a bit burnt out and wanted to make something just entirely different. Apparently, the way that he went about this, he picked a musical genre first and then built the narrative around it, which I think is just, like, so interesting.
You could really see that with the show, because that influence is consistent and present in, like, every episode and all of the action scenes, for sure. Oh my god, I love the music in this show.
The music is absolutely incredible. Like, fucking Nujabes, Fat John, Force of Nature, Suji, all of them that I mentioned before, like, incredible work all around. It's not just the hip-hop music, though. Like, there is also still plenty of traditional, like, there's shamisen music. There's a couple episodes sprinkled in where they add in, like, Ainu singers, which I thought was super rad.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I definitely saw a lot of the shamisen stuff because there's the one character who comes in later who is like a shamisen performer. I just love how much of like the OST is like lo-fi music. Like, I've never seen anything like it. It's really cool.
Yeah, like, I don't buy physical music. I'm a very big proponent of physical media, like buying DVDs, and I have a fucking VHS collection. But I don't really do CDs or anything like that. I would love to have the Samurai Champloo soundtrack on CD.
On vinyl, imagine? Oh, man.
Vinyl might be a little too hipster for me, but...
I don't have, like, I buy vinyls, but I don't have a record player. I just really like having the vinyls because it's like, it's nicer than a CD. You get, like, the big art, you get the big disc, and the disc comes in different colors. I don't know. Something about it.
You're valid. Now, jumping into the actual show itself, I'm going to start us off with a very strong take.
Okay.
I believe that Samurai Champloo might have one of the absolute best first episodes, not just in anime, but in television, period. I think the first episode of Samurai Champloo should be studied for how perfect it is.
Okay. I found some of the stuff to be a little bit confusing because it really blends the literal with the metaphor in that first episode. But I don't hate that. It was just a little bit confusing. It took, like, I think if I watched it again now, knowing what I know, it would be a lot clearer. I was going to say, I did write a lot of praises for the first episode, though, so I was clearly enjoying it. I was just kind of confused.
You get such a wonderful, clear introduction to the three lead characters. All three members of the main cast get an equal amount of time to impact the audience. None of them, like, of the three, like, Jean, Fu, and Mugen, I don't feel like in the first episode one of them outshines the other. They each get equal amount of time to have an impact on the audience. The whole thing is wonderfully paced. It does an excellent job of letting you know what to expect from the show going forward in terms of, like, tone, action, and just, like, overall vibes. Vibes is a word that you're going to hear a lot in this recording because this show has vibes aplenty. And I honestly think that, like, if all that existed of this show was just this first episode, it would still feel like a complete narrative. It would still feel fulfilling as just, like, a fun little animated short with a sort of and the adventure continues kind of ending.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about. I agree, though. I think, like, it stands alone on its own, and I think with how the series ends, without jumping to spoil things, but the end of the whole show feels a little bit like the end of the first episode in a way. Like the tone of it.
You know, I can kind of see what you're talking about there, yeah.
It's very much itself through and through. And it has a very strong sense of identity even in that first episode, I think, for sure.
Strong sense of identity is an excellent way to say it. Like, right from the beginning, this show tells you exactly what it is and what to expect.
I've been mostly referring to that as, like, the art direction and, like, the tone of it, because I think those would be better kind of words to latch onto. Because, like, the art direction is really strong, and there's a lot of, I guess, even, like, the sound direction and the sound design is all really inspired. It's all interwoven together, really.
So much of this show has so much love put into it in a way that, like, there are other shows that exist that are good, well-made shows, but there's a particular level of care that I feel is put into this show in particular on the creative level that just sort of elevates it beyond just being good. Like, I was reading interviews from the creators in the lead up to this about how, like, they specifically wanted the fight scenes choreographed to feel realistic while still being very action-packed. Like, there's not a lot of, like, something they very purposefully did was they didn't want a lot of sword clashes, because in real life, if you smack two katanas together, they're gonna crack. So the majority of fights involve a lot of, like, dodging and very quick movements.
Yes.
Most of the fights end very quickly because that's what a samurai katana fight would be. There'd be a couple of sword slashes exchanged, and then eventually someone's gonna get cut open.
I really like, too, how a lot of, like, the fight scenes seemed to really be taking inspiration from dance and dance choreography. That was something I noticed immediately, and I was like, oh shit, that's a really cool way to incorporate the hip-hop into the actual action itself without necessarily, well, still kind of being period accurate. This show dances like a fine line between historical accuracy and also just taking creative liberties, and it's fascinating.
It does quite literally open with a disclaimer saying, this is a work of fiction, deal with it, essentially. Anachronisms abound. Like, I in no way claim to be an expert on this sort of thing. I am not necessarily an academic in any way, but I do have a bit of a love for, like, Japanese history, mostly around the Sengoku era, not so much the Edo period, where this is sort of nebulously set.
So I actually consistently throughout was trying to figure out, like, what time frame this was taking place in, and towards the end someone says that the age of the samurais is about to end, which makes me want to put this as late Edo period, so like 1840s to 1860s.
I believe it's supposed to be more early Edo period.
Really?
I believe so. But again, it's very nebulous. There's a couple of moments in the show where they mention some sort of like real world historical figure, and I think to myself, like, that doesn't really line up perfectly, but it's fine because, again, the show is playing around with these elements more than it is trying to tell a real historical story.
I actually, like, while I was going through it, mostly towards the end, I was really trying to get a pinpoint of the point in time, and there's some really interesting things that don't feel like they should be a thing, but are. Like, I'll get into it in the baseball episode, which is crazy, but while baseball wasn't widespread, it's technically possible that they could have been playing baseball in Japan in the 1860s.
Yeah.
It's unlikely, but... There
were a couple of times where I had to go and do a quick little Google search at the end of the episode, like the one with the creepy painter guy. Turns out, was it Van Gogh? Yeah. Turns out Van Gogh actually was heavily inspired by ukiyo-e paintings that had, like, found their way over to Holland. I didn't know that. He actually got his start copying ukiyo-e paintings.
I was astoundingly surprised by a lot of historical accuracies. This is taking artistic liberties, but it's not impossible. This is something that hypothetically could have happened.
I think it's very, very fun and very interesting how this show simultaneously is both shockingly historically accurate and very full of anachronisms.
Yeah.
I could see someone else calling that a negative, like, if you're going to try and be accurate, be accurate. If you're going to fool around with things, like, I don't know. Like, I could see someone taking issue with it. I didn't. I think it was still fun, but that is something to point out.
I think it's more fun though this way. And I think that if you were to tell a period accurate story, that it would probably not be very empowering for, like, people who are female and watching, or people, like, this show dips into some of the marginalized groups at the time in interesting ways. And if you were to be 100% historically accurate, I don't know that you would get that.
I don't remember where I saw it, but somewhere during my research into the show, I saw someone online say, this show taught me far more about Edo period brothels than I ever thought I needed to know.
Yeah, actually, it taught me a lot of things about the brothels as well, because I was going back and thinking, oh, now I understand this line from a Vocaloid song that was about girls in a brothel in Edo period, because that's how it was. It put a lot of things into context for me in weird ways.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Now, we've been talking long enough that we should probably actually start covering our main characters.
So I guess we'll start with Mugen, who is the protagonist of this. He's a very Shinichiro Watanabe style character. Like, that was what I thought about when I first saw him. I was like, oh, this is just a Shinichiro Watanabe main character. I didn't like Mugen at first, but he really is just a jerk with a heart of gold, and that comes throughout. We'll get into his backstory later, because it doesn't really give you much in the first episode, but he's really just a samurai who is wandering. He's a kind of like an anti-hero type character, more than a hero, I would say.
He's kind of a dick, is what he is. Like,
yeah, I said jerk with the heart of gold. That's what jerk is.
I would argue the heart of gold part. I think he's more so just a jerk, but like a very fun jerk.
I would disagree, but...
He eventually grows to care about a very small amount of people, but for the most part, he's very much in it for himself.
Okay, I could see that if you're looking at it as more character growth that goes on throughout. I kind of interpreted his personality as he's always been this way. He's just very bad at being vulnerable.
Okay, I can see that take a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, there's a few different ways you can spin it.
And speaking of other Shinichiro Watanabe characters, in the dub, Mugen is voiced by the ever wonderful, ever sexy Steve Blum, who also did Spike in Cowboy Bebop.
Whoa! Ritlock Brimstone! This is for the Guild Wars 2 fans out there. Nobody's gonna get this. That's where I know Steve Blum from.
That's completely lost on me, but I'm glad that you have something.
He's a character in the MMO I met my wife on.
Aw, that's cute.
I'll do Jean next.
Alright.
So Jean is like another samurai who has a bit more of like a conventional samurai upbringing, so to speak. He came from a dojo, he learned martial arts, and he wants to kill Mugen. And I think that's pretty much what we get from him in the first episode.
Sort of.
Sort of. He's like the softer masculine character is really what he feels like. There's like a lot of like the Megane style characters from this point in time that I feel like are like that, because you have the guy from Bleach as well. Uryu, I think his name is. It's been a while.
Yeah. God, actually, come to think of it, Jean and Uryu have a lot in common.
Yeah, they're both like the very like soft masculine characters. They're both Megane. Like, I think that's kind of like an archetype from the time period, the Megane.
We should, for anyone who might not know, because I feel like Megane isn't really a term that's used anymore. I feel like that's kind of an antiquated, from this time period specifically, term. I think Megane just means like person who wears glasses, doesn't it?
Yeah, and then Megane Ko is like the girl version, because ko is like the suffix in Japanese that means daughter.
Yeah.
You hear Meganeko more than you hear Megane.
Yeah. Realistically, Megane just means person with glasses, but it does kind of have its own sort of character tropes tied to it in anime. Yeah, Jean is much more composed, he's much more soft-spoken.
He was my favorite of the main three for sure.
I honestly don't know if I could pick a favorite. I think I like them all pretty equally. But he is excellent. Jean is, if you had to pick a favorite, there's nothing wrong with picking Jean.
And who was his voice actor in the dub?
Oh, yes. Jean was voiced by Kirk Thornton, who is currently the voice of Shadow the Hedgehog.
Oh. Well, other than Keanu Reeves.
Well,
obviously.
in like the games and such, yeah.
Yeah.
And finally we have Fu, who's pretty much the driving force of the plot.
Can I be real with you?
You didn't like Fu?
I didn't like Fu. I tried so hard.
That is not an uncommon take. I will say, I actually really enjoyed Fu. I was surprised how much I like her. Because really, she kind of feels like she's intended to be annoying. And because of that, it's very understandable why most audiences seem to like her. If not hate her, then at least like they like her the least. But I actually thought she was really fun. I enjoyed her quite a bit.
So that's not the issue I take with her, actually.
Oh.
We'll give a little brief spiel about her, and then I can kind of get into my thoughts on her.
Yeah, go ahead.
But Fu is this delightful, bubbly girl. I think she's 15, it says at one point, and I was like, holy shit, she's 15?
Yeah, that caught me off guard. Yeah, she's 15, Mugen is 19, and Jean is 20.
How's Mugen drinking? The drinking age is 20 in Japan. Was it younger during the Edo period?
I'd imagine so.
Although I don't think that would stop him.
Yeah, no, it super wouldn't.
Yeah, so Fu's this delightful, bubbly girl who's working at a tea house. And the tea house gets absolutely fucked over by Mugen and Jean, which is sort of the crux of the first episode. And she decides to take them on a journey to look for a samurai who smells of sunflowers. My issue with Fu is I hate that she's written into the damsel in distress constantly. I wish she got time to shine and be her own person and maybe make her way out of scenarios on her own, but she never seems to. I like her personality. I like her as a character. I don't like how she's written.
So I can definitely see what you're talking about there. I had a thought about that multiple times throughout watching this. Like, there was a couple of points in my notes where I was kind of thinking aloud to myself about this, where she is put in, like, she gets kidnapped and put into dangerous situations and has to be rescued a lot, like almost every other episode, but it never really seemed to bother me for some reason. And usually I would get pretty upset about that kind of shit, because that's
it really bothered me.
That's just bad writing of female characters. And I was trying to think for the longest time, like, why does it not really bother me with Fu? And the reason I think I came down on is that while she does get captured a lot and she does usually have to get saved, she never waits to get saved. She may not be successful in her attempts to escape, but she's always trying. And I think that helps make it acceptable for me. It also helps, of course, that she is already just like a very endearing character who I happen to enjoy. But the fact that even if she usually does in the end need Mugen and Jean to save her, not always, there's a couple times that she's able to get out of danger herself, but even if she usually does need the help, she's never just like sitting around waiting for it, whining. She has, what's the word I'm looking for? She has agency.
Yeah, an ambition. I think for me, the issue comes more so from the nature of the situations she's put in, because early on she's put in a lot of very sexually aggressive rescue scenarios, and then it's dropped that she's 15, and it's like, whoa, this was already weird, now it's really weird.
Yeah, it definitely gets uncomfortable at times, but to the show's credit, and I hate that I have to say this because a lot of other anime that I've seen don't fit into this, but while Phil... While Fu will often get put into some, like, sexual danger scenarios, the show never tries to make it sexy, really.
No.
And yes, it is uncomfortable, but in a way where, like, it feels like that is the intent, like you are supposed to be concerned for her. And sometimes saying, like, oh, it's okay that the scene is uncomfortable because it wants you to be uncomfortable, it's usually used as a cop-out to excuse shitty writing and gross practices with female characters. But in this situation, I think it is actually the case of like, no, you are intended to be concerned for this character.
And it is also like historic and set in a time period where women were often sex trafficked, which is addressed throughout the show. However, I think my issue with it is you don't really get any other female characters who aren't also in danger until like episode 10, which is why it was so slow for me at the start, and I was having such a hard time getting through it, because it feels like a string of Fu getting kidnapped and almost having really bad shit happen to her, and then she gets rescued. And end of episode. Let's move on to the next one. Oh, it's the same thing.
See, the thing is, I can't say that you're wrong, because you're not. It definitely is that. But I think that's just going to be one of those things that comes down to the viewer specifically, because some people are going to be bothered by that, and some people, the rest of the show is so well done and so endearing that it's, I don't want to say that it's forgivable, but it just doesn't really impact my viewing of the show as much, because I don't know, even the first half of the show, which is much more episodic than the second half, those episodes and the little stories contained within them are just always so enjoyable and introduce all of these fun characters. I'm just always having a good time watching it.
I wasn't really having a good time at the start until we really started to get the character development and I start to grow attached to the characters. Like the episode with Mugen and Jean's backstories. I wish we'd had that a little bit sooner, so that we could see before the episodic stuff that there are good traits in these characters. Because I hated Mugen until it went to a Mugen backstory episode. I fucking hated him. And then it went to a backstory episode and I was like, oh shit, this guy rules.
The Mugen backstory two-parter is great.
Yeah.
I think that it comes in at like the perfect point in the show.
I would say put it between two of like the two-part episodic bits where Fu is getting kidnapped. So you have a break from Fu getting kidnapped. You get to learn about Mugen, and then it doesn't feel like she's getting kidnapped as soon as she got saved again. But that's just my 2 cents. That's how I'd structure it.
That is a point that I will put. I don't know if I would say if it's in the show's favor, but it is something that I like, where sometimes the show will go very hard into drama and emotional trauma, and you end the episode on the verge of tears, and then pretty much every single time that happens, the next episode is a nice little lighthearted, fun breather to kind of just give you a moment to calm, and I really appreciate that. I appreciate they don't just like overload you on the feels.
It's a little like it's not quite like it, but you know, like when you're watching an anime that has like a really sad episode and then it starts playing the ending theme that's really happy and you're just like
Sometimes that's very fun though, like you've finished watching Pain beat the shit out of Naruto and everyone's about to die and then it's Bachkai baby.
I think of like Hunter x Hunter and like Madoka, because they both have like the really upbeat pop ending themes and they both have some fucking episodes.
Now, before I forget...
Fu's voice actor.
Yes, she is voiced by, I'm probably going to mispronounce this, Carrie Walgren, who modern audiences are most going to recognize as Granny Ayase from Dan Da Dan.
I think I recognized her from something really weird.
Before we move on to start talking more about the show, I do want to say the episode Baseball Blues that happens much later on in the show, that gave me a nice little excuse to go and watch at least one of the episodes in the Japanese dub, because in that episode you have a bunch of Americans coming over and they're speaking English, and I just really wanted to see what that was like in the Japanese dub. And because of that, I got to enjoy the Japanese voices of our main trio, and I really enjoy their performances, but Mugen's seiyuu, especially Kazuya Nakai, does just an amazing job. It's different from what we got to experience in the dub for sure, but it's equally as good. I really loved his performance especially.
Okay, yeah, Carrie Walgreen, I'm looking at her now. She was Haruko from Fulikuli.
Yes. I think I was actually going to put that in the show notes, but then the Dan Da Dan one was a little more interesting to me, because I didn't expect that to be the same person.
I haven't seen Dan Da Dan still, actually.
Uh-oh. It's really good. Let's get into the show proper a bit more again. Coldest take in the world. The soundtrack is incredible. We already kind of covered that. We don't really need to go more in depth. The animation, the fact that, the animation is already beautiful. It's gorgeous. It's fluid. The fight scenes are spectacular. But the fact that it came out all the way back in 2004 makes the animation quality stand out even more so.
So I was actually really surprised when I saw when this was made, because it feels so 90s to me.
Oh, absolutely, which I think we can probably chalk up just to it being a Watanabe production.
Yeah, and when it was made, because it was airing in 2004, but I'm assuming that they were working on it in 2003, right?
Oh, I'd imagine so. Actually, apparently the animation quality is partially the result of Watanabe was just so passionate about the project that animators from other studios were inspired to come and help at Manglobe to assist.
Interesting.
Watanabe was just this beacon of light that drew other animators to him. It's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it with, he's got a lot of ambition and great visions for what he wants his work to be. And you can really see that from this series because of just how woven in the anachronisms are in just beautiful ways.
Absolutely.
Oh, one thing I wanted to note about the animation is I wrote bullet point note here that says sexy line weighting. That line weighting is sexy. Way that in action scenes, the lines get all thick on the outside. Oh my god.
It's amazing.
That's something I've been working on in my art recently. So when I saw it, I was like, that's what I want mine to be like. This is gorgeous.
And not so much on the animation, but more so just the art style in general. I'm not really sure how to elaborate on this any further, but I think you'll understand what I'm saying when I say I love how ugly so many of the characters are.
Yes, they're not made in the standard anime style to look conventionally attractive, and they're off-model a lot, is I think a good way to put it too.
Yes, but in an interesting and fun way. I don't know.
In an organic way.
Yeah, I don't really know how to word it. It's just I appreciate that so many of the characters just look horrible.
I love when characters just look like normal people. I really find that really charming and endearing in works, where it's not everyone is same face, base anime model, but with brown hair or whatever the hell.
Yes.
But it really reminds me too of I don't know the name of the mangaka, but the one who did Mob Psycho and One Punch Man. Because he does really similar stuff with his character design as well, where he goes out of his way to make characters look more believable and less aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah, I think his pen name is just One.
Yes, it is.
Something that was very interesting to me going back, I almost feel like it's sort of a, not really Mandela effect, I don't know if that's the word that I'm looking for, but the show is very well known for its anachronisms, you've got the beatboxing samurai, or the graffiti
I hated
punks.
That one. The beatboxing one was the worst of all of them. I don't want to hear his awful mouth sounds. Go away, be gone.
I thought it was very fun.
I think I just didn't appreciate the experience of him spitting in my ear with headphones on.
Fair enough. I can understand that. But no, the show is very well known for these anachronisms, but upon rewatching, it really doesn't actually happen as often as I remember, and as often as I think a lot of other people who probably grew up watching it remember.
I think there's there's a lot of subtlety.
Yeah, it's there mainly in the soundtrack. It's mostly the soundtrack.
Yes.
But there's a shocking number of episodes that, like, kind of just play out as period pieces that just have a hip-hop backing track. And then it's just every now and then you get... I think this was the beatboxing episode also, but there's one where they have a, what's the thing where, like, someone rides in and two people carry it on either end?
Oh, like, I want to call that a pallbearer, but no, that's for coffins. Oh, on the topic of anachronisms, I do also have a note that says, is that McFucking breakdancing? In all capital letters, because I immediately clocked that the fighting was, like, choreographed like dance, and I was like, oh shit, this is the direction we're going. We're taking inspiration not just from samurais, but from, like, performance artists. This is so inspired.
Okay, I've tried Googling it. I can't find it. I keep getting, like, rickshaws, and that's not it. But in the episode, they had that thing where it's like it's like a carriage, but without wheels, and they're carrying it, and they take it to a dude who works on them, and he's talking about, like, oh, you tricked it out to be a lowrider, which is, what?
Oh, I missed that. I didn't realize that was what that was.
It was really funny, but it's one of the more egregious parts of the anachronisms and the blending of styles. But yeah, it doesn't happen as often as I remembered it did, which is not a knock against it or anything, I just thought it was interesting. Now, it took a little while for you to really get into the show, but eventually it happened. It sounds like it was more about, like, the midway point that you finally started to be like, oh, I see what's going on.
I think I literally wrote a note where I was like, oh, I'm actually enjoying this. I think it was towards the end of the Weed episode.
Of course it was the Weed episode that you enjoyed.
Well, it was when I started having fun with it.
Now, I was enjoying the show straight from the beginning. I enjoyed the show the entire way through. There are a few episodes that I do kind of feel are, like, standout highlights of the show. Almost in the way where I said, like, I think the first episode could be treated like a little animated short of sorts. I didn't have any of the titles written down, but the three main ones were the one where Jean falls in love with a prostitute.
Yes, that was where I started really, really liking the show.
It was so gorgeous. That was one of the first ones that I believe that's the first one where I actually cried at the end.
I don't think I cried. I think I was just like, wow, this is so beautiful.
It was so lovely. Complete opposite end of the spectrum. The one with the graffiti brothers, I thought was super fucking fun, and it had probably the most distilled, like, I can't think of any other way to say it other than just, like, the hip-hop energy that the show is known for. Like, this was that.
It's very punk, too. Very 90s punk.
And then the other episode, or in this case, the two-parter, and honestly I think might just be, like, the best episodes of the show, are the two-parter with the blind lady, which I don't want to go too deep into here because spoilers, but
yeah,
God, those episodes are amazing, especially, like, all of it's great, like, the writing is great, the characters, the tone, blah blah blah, all that, but, like, especially the fight scenes with, like, the rain fights. Oh my God.
I think actually she was my favorite character from the whole show. I think that was what I came to conclude when I was reflecting on all of the characters, because she's just such an interesting character and she's very well explained in the amount of time you see her.
I would be hard pressed to disagree with you. She's pretty fantastic.
I wish we got more of her. I won't say how much we get of her, but I wish we got more of her.
That is something that I absolutely wanted to bring up, is it's not a complaint, but it is a thing to note where this show, because of the episodic nature, you are constantly being introduced to these fun, unique, interesting characters, and there's almost always this feeling of melancholy, because for as much fun as you're having with them, in the back of your mind, you just know that after this episode, you're never going to see them again, and it sucks, because some of them are great.
Some of them do come back, like the detective, but a lot of them don't.
Yeah.
Like, I was hoping we would have at least got, like, a little bit in the final episode to be like, hey, did Jin go back for what's her name, and did this girl ever track down Mugen? But
yeah.
I mean, I'm okay with it ending that way. I don't think everything needs to be wrapped up in the end of a narrative, and I think especially with the tone of this one, that it makes more sense that it's not wrapped up with a neat ribbon.
Oh, absolutely. Were there any specific episodes in particular that you would like to shout out as just, like, you really enjoyed these specifically?
Oh god, yes. So the one that I really liked was, I think it was episode 13. The second part of the boat episode, like the pirate ship episode.
Oh, the Mugen backstory.
Yes. Because, oh my god, the animation. Oh my god. And like the visual metaphors. What did I write here? I think I wrote a note somewhere that was like, I want a full show of Mugen drowning.
There's a couple of times this isn't really a spoiler. There's a couple of times in the show where Mugen is like near death and we get these visuals of what, like, it could be actually happening. It could be hallucination, whatever, but we get these visuals of what is essentially supposed to be him getting ready to be carried off to the afterlife, which I forget their name, but I did find in my research that those like weird leaf cloaked masked creatures are based on very specific spirits from Ainu folklore, which I thought that was really rad.
Okay,
but
yeah.
the visual style in those moments always gets really interesting.
Yeah, it's genuinely some of the most beautiful animation I've ever seen. And I think for me, that's what kept me going in this show was like the art direction until I got to a point, like this episode is where I was like, in my notes, I wrote, holy fuck, holy fuck, holy fuck, this is so beautiful. I want a whole show of Mugen drowning. Yeah, no, absolutely gorgeous. And then that comes up again in one of the later episodes. I would say that's like a near-death experience more than anything else.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it's meant to be instilling. And it comes up later. And when it comes up later, I think they did traditional animation, like on paper. At this point in time, I think most anime was still being done on cells. So I think in order to have gotten the visual style that they got with the birds, I think it was in episode 25.
I know what you're talking about, yeah.
Where there's ravens or some kind of blackbird flying. And I'm pretty sure that was done like with charcoal on paper, because I don't know how they would have done that with a cell.
I'm pretty sure this was digital animation.
Really?
I'm pretty sure.
I thought digital animation, I guess it's the early 2000s. I keep thinking this is the 90s.
No, yeah. And I was going to say, as you were once again complimenting the animation style, like, yeah, and this was 2004. Which, again, makes it even more impressive.
Yeah. And just the visual metaphors for, like, oh, he is on the brink of death, and he is having a near-death experience. That was so cool to me. I feel like you never see good abstraction of stuff like that. And this was abstract in such a beautiful way, and such a poignant way.
I'm a little upset with myself that it took us until this long to talk about this specific aspect of the show, because it is one of the most iconic aspects of the show. But as long as we're speaking about beautiful abstract visuals, the show's OP is incredible.
Mm-hmm. I don't really have anything to say on that point. It's solid. It's a good opening.
Like, the song is fantastic. That one is, I believe, specifically a Nujabe's Nujabe. I really don't.
I think it's Nujabe's. That's, I think, what I've heard people say.
I really should have looked that up. The song is amazing, but the visuals that they have in the OP specifically are mesmerizing to watch. And I especially like the theme in the visuals where you have a shot of Jean and he's associated with a koi fish, but then you have shots of Mugen and he's associated with a rooster. And that's some great iconography right there.
I love the Mugen rooster iconography. It's such a good deconstruction of his character that he's like this super aggressive creature that holds itself in high regard.
Yes.
Right? It's a really good choice. I think Jean could be a little bit more threatening than a koi fish, but I think it's supposed to really just be also relying on Japanese iconography from the time period.
I feel like the Jean koi fish iconography is mostly supposed to focus on how calm he is and how he's able to go with the flow, as cliche as that sounds. Okay.
Yeah, I could see that. And he is also very traditionally a samurai compared to Mugen. So I feel like the nature of us as podcasters, we are both openly queer. I feel like we have to talk about the episode with the weird fucking Holland dude coming to Japan because he thinks it's a gay paradise.
I loved that episode. It was really fun. And yeah, I think that is actually the first episode to really focus on Japan's relationship with the West at the time.
I think so, because it's episode 6.
Yeah, that would probably be it.
And up until then, we're watching Fu get kidnapped and then get kidnapped again.
Yeah, because for anyone who might not know, at the time in Japanese history, I'm in no way an expert on this, but Japan had I believe it was because of Tokugawa, Japan had a law in place where Westerners were not allowed on Japanese shores. The only country that was allowed to trade with Japan was Holland, I believe, and it was only at like one specific port at one specific area of Japan, and otherwise white people were illegal, essentially. Like if you were a European who had found his way to Japan and you were caught wandering outside of that dock, you would just straight up get arrested, I believe.
Okay, that puts some things into context. I was unaware of that, but that tracks. Yeah. I think they touch on it, but because they also talk about how there is a guy who's allowed to be there because he has, like a permit, because he's like an ambassador.
Yes. And actually, that's something else to note about the show. Like, I caught the majority of these historical references because, like I said near the beginning of the episode, I've always been kind of a nerd for Japanese history, at least like a little bit. You don't need to know all of this like historical stuff in order to enjoy the show, but I do think there is a bit of it where your enjoyment is heightened if you already have those contexts.
For sure. And like I had some context for some of them, but for this one I was just completely like under the opinion that it was like, oh, white people still aren't super well integrated into Japanese society today. I would assume that it's like that, but no, not that it's literally illegal and people are going to jail. Like that puts a lot into context of that episode.
Yeah, okay. I might regret saying this out loud because knowing my luck, I'm going to be very, very wrong and we're going to get some very upset people in the comments, but I believe the reason why Tokugawa put those laws in place after he got done pretty much unifying Japan after the Sengoku era was because the West during the Sengoku period, during the tail end of it, it was trade with the rest that brought in guns. And I think that was one of the... I think it was partially that, and then also partially he was just kind of xenophobic and scared of like the West's influence on Japan in general, but I'm
it was
sure...
the 1800s.
Yeah.
But we're still bad today.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure the guns played a decent-sized part in him being like, bye-bye, white people.
I do have a note on this episode as well that says, did this suddenly pivot to making fun of white tourists? Because it really starts to feel that way, like, once they start to do the international stuff, and then it kind of becomes an ongoing theme in the show, and you're like, oh, this isn't about tourist culture necessarily, there's more to this. I thought this was just commentary on tourist culture. There's definitely, like, some of it is for sure, but not all of it.
Yeah. On that note, actually, I'm just now thinking about this. I am very, very white. You are very, very white. We are two incredibly white people.
Yes.
We do not have the ability as incredibly white people to go too in depth on this topic, but I think we would be doing a disservice if we did not at least mention how this is a show made in Japan that takes a lot of inspiration from hip-hop and especially the African-American portion of hip-hop culture. There is an argument to be made where you could potentially see that as cultural appropriation, and there's a conversation to be had within that. Neither of us are qualified to have that conversation, but I did want to at least put that out there as this is a thing to think about, maybe.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult to speak to it too, since it's so, like, the inspiration it's pulling from is so Western, and the subject matter is so Japanese that it's... I could see it, though. Like, I could see why people would say this would be culturally appropriative. However, I really don't know how to tackle it when it's cultures that are this far apart.
Yeah.
Because usually when you see stuff with contexts of cultural appropriation, it's appropriating from marginalized people within your own community and putting that out and profiting off of that. Whereas this is two cultures that are geographically on, not on opposite sides of the world, but very far apart.
Yeah.
So I don't even know how to, like, dive into that.
Now, I'm not entirely sure how reliable this information is, but from what I read, Watanabe had Western audiences in mind when he was making this show, which at the time was much more uncommon. But the success of Cowboy Bebop in the West had actually, like, put that into his mind. And in fact, Samurai Champloo was licensed for North American audiences a year before it even aired in Japan, specifically because of how successful Cowboy Bebop was on Adult Swim.
Interesting. Because I know that with Space Dandy, it was simulcast, dubbed, and subbed at the same time. So this is kind of... I guess Cowboy Bebop came out first in Japan and then later in the US. This came out first in the US and later in Japan, and then Space Dandies when it comes out at the same time.
No, so it was like, when I say it was licensed before it aired in Japan, like they signed the papers to be like, hey, we want this show. It aired in 2005. It started airing a year after it started airing in Japan. It's just Western networks knew, hey, this is gonna be a banger. We want this, please. Before it even started airing. Mm-hmm. Before we go any further, I have one last thing that was really weighing on my mind, especially like in the halfway point of the show. And it's gonna sound a little weird at first, but I want you to just bear with me.
I love weird. Hit me with it.
There's something very Pirates of the Caribbean about this show. The way they talk about the age of the samurai coming to an end, and the way they present the advancing times, just reminds me a lot of how that movie talked about the age of piracy. Very similar tones of, like, wistful romanticization combined with resigned acceptance.
All I know about Pirates of the Caribbean is that it made so many people bisexual. Because of Keira Knightley.
That's not the point I was making at all.
I think I watched the first Pirates of the Caribbean, but I fell asleep halfway through it because I don't like action. I'm the weirdest person, because if you put on something with action, I will get bored and fall asleep while, like, stuff is blowing up. Like, that was an issue I had with One Punch Man, actually, was I kept falling asleep while I was watching One Punch Man. But then, like, Mob Psycho, I'll just sit and watch that for hours because I like the characters and the drama of it.
Well, at the very least, I've given the audience some food for thought there.
It does sound analogous. I just can't really speak to it.
Fair. Now, before we get into the end of the show, I do want to take this as the opportunity for us to air out any potential grievances that we still have left over about the show. And I'm just going to knock the big one out of the way right now. The zombie mushroom episode. It's not bad in and of itself. It's a fun enough little episode, but it's also, in a show that is already so episodic and disconnected, it is the least connected to anything. It makes zero sense, and I understand fully why basically everyone agrees it is the worst episode of the show.
Really?
It is completely skippable. Yes.
Really? I had fun with it. I thought it was a good time. It felt very much to me like they were like, okay, in America, they fucking love holiday episodes. Let's do a Halloween episode. Like, that's what it feels like to me, for sure.
It's great that you say that, because I actually did Google after I was done watching the episode when it aired, because I was like, was this a Halloween episode? Like, what the fuck? It's not that the episode is bad, as much as it is just that it feels the most like a waste of time. Like, it comes so close to the end, and so close to where, like, you know as the audience that it's getting to the climax, you know things are finally about to culminate, and then out of nowhere we just have this complete detour of an episode that has no bearing on anything, and really just feels like a waste of time, regardless of how amusing it is in a vacuum.
Yes, but you could say that about the baseball episode too.
You could, actually. That is true.
The baseball episode is directly before the climax and feels way less grounded. Well, I guess it's not way less grounded. The mushroom episode is pretty fucking crazy, but it's about, like, the same level of insanity. I think there's also some really interesting, it does kind of lean on the idea that there are fungi that will turn people into zombies. Or, well, not people, but, like, animals. Like, if you know, like, the Paris and Parasect mushroom.
Yeah. Cordyceps, I think is what they're called.
Yeah. So I feel like it's also kind of pulling from that direction. And I think that could be, like, a really interesting take on it. Is that it's kind of pulling in these concepts. And that's where, like, the zombie stuff is coming from, is because it's not like it feels very Western zombie, but it's happening as a result of mushrooms, which I feel like you can't ignore that. And also, those mushrooms I know are in Japan.
Oh.
I'm pretty sure, right? Like, that's why Paris is a thing. Like, who else would have thought of Paris in 1996, 1995?
I don't know. Like, Magmar is based on an incredibly obscure Korean folklore spirit.
Diverse variants of cordyceps have had more than 1,500 years of use in Chinese medicine. So it's very...
Close enough.
It's very, it looks like there's a very rich history of cordyceps in East Asia.
Okay.
The genus has a worldwide distribution, with most of the known species being from Asia. So I think that could definitely be part of the influence for the zombie episode that could be easily overlooked. And I think that that's interesting.
I don't see it, but I'm also not going to go so far as to say that you're wrong.
I like mushrooms. Mushrooms are cool.
I only really had one other complaint, and it's not a big one, but while I wasn't really bothered by Fu getting kidnapped a lot and getting put into, like, potentially sexual danger, there were one too many Fu fat jokes for my liking.
Yeah. Oh, that is something that I was not a fan of, but I kind of just chalked it up to the time that it came out, because this was early 2000s, fat phobia was fucking rampant.
Yeah, it's the only part of the show where you kind of just have to shake your head and go, 2004.
I mean, there's some homophobia that, like, rubbed me the wrong way, too, but again, that's very 2004.
See, that didn't even read 2004 to me as much as it just read, like,
Mugen's
time
a dick.
period of the set. Yeah, that's just Mugen being an asshole.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I think the thing that bothered me most about the fat phobia was that the voice actor did a different voice.
Oh, yeah. She started talking like this.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that. I think that was worse than the visual gag. I don't know why that feels worse to me, but it feels icky.
I think it just elevates the badness of the gag.
That's probably it. I love Gene's fishing arc. That was my favorite part of the show, was his character growth and learning to fish. I love that.
Yeah!
That was
a
so
really
charming. Gene just gets all the good stuff. He gets all the little sprinkles of fun. He gets the good relationship arc. He gets the good fishing arc.
That was another episode where you get a little bit more enjoyment if you know a little smidgen of Japanese history, because the weird old man who was teaching him how to fish makes a joke that he's Miyamoto Musashi, who's like a insanely famous historical samurai.
Oh, okay. Oh, I did think in the vandalism episode, they talked about, like, words having power, and I got really excited because I thought they were going to do, like, a rap battle scene, and they didn't. And I feel like that was a missed opportunity. I want to see Mugen rap battle someone.
It's weird to hear you say that when you also complained about the beatboxing episode.
Yes, but they could have, like, a shamisen as the background.
Ooh, okay,
Like,
I would like that a lot. I love the shamisen.
You know, like, the rap from Zombieland Saga? I don't know if you've seen Zombieland Saga, but there's a rap in Zombieland Saga that's backed with a shamisen, something like that.
Yeah, I remember that. All right, I think we've covered most of what we want to up to this point. Let's go ahead and touch on the end of the show itself, which we will as spoiler-free as we possibly can. Now, I do know from my research that at the time, there were a lot of people who thought that the ending was kind of anticlimactic. They thought it was a little too disappointing, basically. I can see why someone would think that. I fully disagree. I don't want to, we don't want to say too much because of spoilers, but I cannot imagine the show ending any other way and it feeling any better.
Yeah.
The ending we have just feels right for how it got to it.
I also think that the climax is, like, the strongest point of the show.
It's really, I wish we could talk about it more, but, spoilers, but I was fully satisfied with it. Like, I was tearing up halfway through the last episode, and I had a full cry moment for a good 5 to 10 minutes once the episode was over. I will completely admit this.
Because the show is very much that it's about the journey and not the destination, and that's pretty common throughout the show. So it makes sense that I feel like no ending could satisfy 100% of people.
Yeah. I do know a very common criticism for the show is that a lot of people feel the first half is a little too disjointed and unevenly paced, and then takes it about to the second half before things really... Because the second half is where it focuses more on the overall plot, whereas the first half is much more episodic. I like both halves equally. They definitely focus more on the Sunflower Samurai plot and moving it forward throughout the episodic parts of the episodes in the second half, but I don't feel like the first half is bad because it's episodic. I think it's episodic done well.
I think it's also very indicative of when this was coming out, because this was airing on Adult Swim in the West. People were watching it on television. They weren't watching it on streaming services. It needed to be episodic enough that you could watch an episode and still understand the purpose of it, And I think that's probably part of why it was so effective at what it did, because it was episodic.
Oh yeah, the nature of how anime has changed in how it is produced and like the nature of like binge watching and streaming services and all that versus how it was back in these times. That is a topic that I'm sure we will be broaching many times throughout the podcast.
But also I noticed that this show doesn't have a lot of like last time on Samurai Champloo, like a lot of other shows at the time did. I don't know if that was cut out.
Recap episode though, which is very of the time.
I actually watched the whole recap episode because I really wanted to hear what Fu had to say about all the stuff that happened because it's kind of narrated by her, that episode.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get to see her a little bit more, you know?
I watched the whole thing too, just in case there ended up being something important by the end, because sometimes they'll do that. Like, they'll trick you into watching a recap episode by promising that there will actually be something important in the last, 10 seconds.
I just really enjoyed the way it was framed. So the recap episode it's basically Jean and Mugen reading Fu's diary. Well, Jean's reading it. Mugen's listening to Jin read it because he can't read.
I love that bit, that character bit, where it's like, of course he can't fucking read.
Yeah, if you grow up on an island full of people who are isolated there, you're not going to learn how to fucking read. But yeah, so they're reading the diary, so you kind of get to hear what Fu is thinking about the situation she's been put in. And I kind of wanted to hear her perspective because I feel like she doesn't really get enough time to speak and talk in a lot of the early episodes because she's just immediately whisked away. You see her interacting with antagonists, but you don't see her airing her true thoughts because obviously she's going to be guarded if she's being held captive.
Yeah.
So I thought that framing was really fun.
Yeah, as far as recap episodes go, it was a pretty good one. Now, I think at this point we have covered everything that we want to about the show, but before we end, something really fun that I wanted to do is I went back and I found old reviews from when the show was coming out. Because I think it would be really fun to kind of compare, what we thought as, modern audiences, so to speak, compared to, what the thoughts were at the time. So I have a couple of reviews here that I've grabbed little excerpts from that I would like to read off, just for funsies.
I guarantee you that none of these people have any of the same reviews that I do. I don't think anyone else paused the episode for 20 minutes and tried to look at mushrooms. I think our experience is going to be 100% unique regardless, but I'm interested to see how they look juxtaposed for sure.
Now, the first review I have is from Anime News Network. It's from reviewer Theron Martin, 2005, and this is specifically something I found is that a lot of the old Anime News Network reviews are specifically reviewing the DVD releases. So, this is from his review of the first DVD, which is the first 4 episodes. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, that makes sense considering that at the time, otherwise you would have had to be watching once a week.
Yeah, that's fair. Theron says, "The greatest beauty of Samurai Champloo is that everything about it contributes to its hipness. Characters are given crisp dialogue heavy on tude." He specifically writes it as tude. I like that. And ample opportunities both to display that tude and to show off their skill. Character designs are heavily stylized, stressing thin, gangly limbs and characterized faces, while costuming reflects the time in which the series is set, but also incorporates a certain panache. The animation gives the characters ample opportunities for interesting expressions and poses, and even the MTV-like editing furthers the overall trendiness.
Oh my god.
I really like that bit, MTV-like editing. I like that part.
I've literally been watching an MTV reality show the past few days, and they're so right. That's exactly what it feels like. I've been watching Catfish, and
oh my god,
that came out in the 2010s, but it still is very much MTV, and it feels like that.
Amazing.
I do also want to say I don't think I've ever heard someone say costuming to refer to a drawn character. Usually that would refer to live actors.
Yeah, normally you would just say character design.
Yeah.
Now, the other review I have, also from Anime News Network, this is from Carlos Santos for the second DVD release, episodes 5 to 9. For months, anime fans have discussed Samurai Champloo's hip-hop samurai aesthetic, and now that the argument has been beaten into submission, let's summarize. It works. The idea is more than just urban beats set against historical fight scenes, though. Playful anachronisms creep their way into every aspect of this series. Beatboxing samurai, a policeman using a sword as an exercise device. Sure, why not? Add to that a whimsical, unpredictable sense of humor, and the result is pure entertainment. What Samurai Champloo lacks, however, is a strong, continuous storyline. Let's face it, the search for the Sunflower Samurai is just an excuse to send three unlikely folks on an amusing road trip through old-time Japan. Each episode on this disc is a fine blend of action, comedy, and drama, but nothing really strings them together except the progression of time. The pacing isn't perfect either. With such slick action scenes, the downtime and dialogue in between can sometimes be a bore. I disagree with that bit. I disagree with the idea that the downtime is boring. I think, one, that the downtime is necessary, and I also think that it is done. I think that it is done well. I think the downtime is when we get some really good character beats and really good atmosphere. That's the word I was looking for. Also, this might just be a me thing, but the part where he complains about the Sunflower Samurai Fu's storyline essentially just being an excuse to string together all of these episodic stories, I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, again, I really enjoy the episodic nature of the show because the benefit of a episodic series, because there's other series like this that I've enjoyed for the same reasons, the benefit of an episodic series is you get so many more excuses to play around with characters and scenarios, and you're not so strenuously tied down to one concept or set of concepts. This allows you to have things like the baseball episode, the weed episode, the super emotional Jin falls in love with a prostitute episode. Like, the episodic nature is to the show's benefit, not detriment.
I think that this review is really suffering from the fact that the DVD releases are like 4 episodes. Like,
for sure.
Do you have any reviews that are like for the full show and not just for like 5 episodes apiece?
The only one that I could find from ANN was for the Blu-ray release, and that was in like 2019, so that's kind of outside where I was trying to look
Interesting.
for. I did find a bunch of reviews from the time period on my anime list from like users, you know, but it's mostly just waves and waves of people praising the show in various ways.
Yeah, as my anime list forums tend to do.
Yeah. I don't want to try and make some big distinction between, like, quote-unquote professional reviewers, because that's a whole other conversation, but I found in doing this that the ANN reviews from the time period are where we're finding the more interesting snippets.
Yeah.
There can be fun little bits to find in, like, the My Anime List and forums and such from back in the day as well, but this is where we're finding the meat of things, I suppose you could say.
I think it makes sense, though, because ANN is really, like, it feels like a publication. It's just digital.
Yeah, I think it is basically just a digital magazine.
I do feel like I really understand where this reviewer was coming from, though, because I did have some similar issues with the pacing. I don't think it's bad that it's in an episodic style. I just think that I wish we got a little bit more of the plot a little earlier on. Because it does feel like the plot is not going to be consequential until you start to get into the thick of it. I
can sort of see that. This is a bit of a complaint that I forgot to make earlier, but I do wish that Gene's backstory had happened a bit earlier, because you don't get the, like, you hear about his backstory multiple times throughout the show, but you don't get the quote-unquote reveal about what really happened until, like, the second to last episode. And I do kind of wish that had happened maybe, like, 5 or 6 episodes earlier.
See, I liked that reveal because I didn't see it coming. I wish the Fu reveal had come sooner because my wife immediately clocked that reveal of what her relationship is with the Sunflower Samurai and why she's looking for them.
See, I knew it just because I had already seen the show before.
She clocked it, like, super early. It was in, like, a really, really early episode, but she called it, and she was like, oh, that's absolutely what the hook is. And they really, really wait to reveal it. And by that point, you kind of know already. Because you've put enough to
figure out.
You've put enough together about her backstory to understand. I feel like I wish that had come up sooner. I think that could have come up in the first 9 episodes and no one would have batted an eye. Like, I think it would have been fine.
See, I would actually go the other way, if anything, and I would have them hide it better to reveal it later.
That would also be valid, but I think as it is, I think it would have been more compelling of a reveal to happen earlier on, because it would kind of reward people for for speculating about where things are going. Like, it's more of an immediate reward for the viewer to be like, I totally knew it. And then you start to understand why this journey is important, which is, I feel like, it's information we should be getting sooner, because otherwise it just feels like a plot looming in the background, you know? Even though it's the main focus and direction of the show.
Yeah, I can see that.
I would switch some things around if I wrote this, but I don't think I don't think I have the capacity in me to write something this good off the top of my head. So it's easy to nitpick.
And you know what? That's a pretty decent sort of kind of closing thought. Like, for as many complaints as you had about the show in the beginning, eventually it sounds like you came to have the opinion of this is still very good.
Oh yeah, I did not have fun for the first, 8 episodes, but once it started to give me more of what was going on and gave me more female characters in the background who weren't being put into bad situations constantly, it really grew on me.
Final question of the day. Would you recommend this to somebody today?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think it's got a lot of merits, and I think that being one of Watanabe's works, you kind of have to if you want to be in the anime space. You can't go into anime spaces without having seen anything by him, because it's just so important within the anime community and the culture of it. It adds so much context to so many things, and I feel like I'm going to be going and watching other stuff and recognizing, oh, this is a Samurai Champloo reference now.
So you would go so far almost as to call this required viewing.
I would say that this is probably a staple, especially if you're looking at the Western anime boom, because this was one of the big Toonami ones, wasn't it? Yeah. Is Toonami the same as Adult Swim? I don't know if they're the same or not.
So, Toonami sometimes aired on Adult Swim.
Okay.
Adult Swim aired anime by itself, and then there were periods where Toonami would air on Adult Swim, and there were periods where Toonami would air on, normal Cartoon Network, and they would just show, less adult anime.
I mean, I would say this is required watching, but also I haven't finished Cowboy Bebop, so I don't know. I'm even listening to my own advice.
I mean, there can be 2 Watanabe things that we put on the same echelon.
I think you have to watch either Cowboy Bebop or Samurai Champloo.
My answer to the question is a pretty obvious one. You've heard me throughout this entire episode. Obviously, I think this is incredible and fantastic and thesaurus words. And yeah, no, please watch Samurai Champloo. It's fantastic. Splendiferous.
Splendiferous.
There's a couple episodes I think you can skip. You can skip the recap episode. You're not going to agree with me, but I think you can probably skip the zombie episode, if only because it gives you one less episode to watch.
Yeah. What did you think of the sub to the dub? Because you said you watched an episode subbed.
Oh, the Japanese dub was great. I did only see, snippets of one episode of it, but the main cast, at least, I loved their performances. I would definitely suggest watching the dub, though. Mm-hmm. This is a really, really good dub.
Yeah. I was just wondering if there was, if you thought maybe that it, the voice actors weren't as good as in the English, perhaps, because people speak so highly of this dub.
I think the voice actors in both languages are equally as skilled. I think the reason why the dub is so highly preferred is because it's sort of like Bakano, where the show itself has so many Western influences that the English performances just kind of feel right.
Yeah, because Bakano's is it set in Europe? I don't remember. It's been so long. It sounds European. It sounds Italian.
It's set in 1920s America.
Oh, it's in America. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you, everyone, very much for listening. We are at Weeb Years on both Blue Sky and Twitter.
And if you'd like to send in a listener question or give suggestions, feedback, we also have a mailbox, theweebyears@gmail.com.
Yeah, if you like spending time with us today, we'd really appreciate it if you helped us grow, Share the podcast on social media, tell all your anime-loving friends, leave a comment, leave a review, etc. We really like doing this, and the more people that listen, the more we can keep doing this.
We have big plans.
So many plans, so many spreadsheets. But yeah, bye-bye, everybody.
See you next time.